Mariana, my cousin, was the eldest daughter of my uncle Carlos and my aunt Marta. We were never too close because we were very different, but I always liked her very much. I enjoyed when I saw her and we exchanged some light talk at family parties. And from my perspective, Mariana had everything to be happy. She went to a private school where she took the best grades. Her friends were as pretty and popular as she was. At 14 years old, puberty seemed not to affect her at all because she was so pretty and nice that she was always the center of attention wherever she went. His parents had the most comfortable economy in our entire family. Nothing seemed to be missing. That's why the world seemed to come over us the night we received a call from my grandfather, saying that Mariana had committed suicide. I remember that my father passed by us minutes later, and we left as a soul that leads the devil to the house of my uncle Carlos. The family and everyone there were distressed, incredulous, while the police continued to check in. The neighbors of the private were swirling around. My Aunt Martha told us, broken to pieces, what happened. While she and my uncle visited some friends, Mariana was at home preparing to go to a party with her friends. Lucia, the youngest daughter, was about to arrive from her swimming training, shortly after 8 at night. The mother of one of her friends left her at the door of the house, as always. But when Lucia entered, she came across the most horrible scene that could be imagined, with something that no one, much less an 8-year-old girl, would even have to conceive in her head. Her sister hung from her neck from the balcony of her parents' room, hanging right in front of the entrance, still with the school uniform on. All deaths are sad, yes, but this one destroyed the family. It took a long time for us, even, to resume our lives normally, without having Mariana permanently in our heads. I dreamed for a long time with the scene, as real as if I had lived it myself. The marriage of my uncles lasted just a year more after that. My uncle Carlos went to live in the United States, where he is, and my Aunt Marta moved to Querétaro with Lucia. The house, practically abandoned after what happened. It was her property and became more of a burden, a bad memory, than a good for her family. At that time, coincidentally, my dad wanted to invest by buying a small apartment, but my Aunt Marta, for being his sister, offered him the house for a much lower price than it really cost. Convinced that it would be taking advantage of her sister's pain, my father refused, until my grandfather convinced him that, in the end, it would be the best for all. He finally bought the house, remodeled it, and tried to rent it for several months without luck. When I was about to enter the preparatory school, my parents wanted me to enter one with a better academic level. A private school for the first time in my life. It would be, they told me, in the same school that Mariana had attended since elementary school. And it also felt to me like a bucket of cold water when they announced to me that due to the proximity of the school and the work of my parents, the most convenient thing for all of us would be to move to the newly bought house and rent the house on the outskirts where we had always lived. Of course, I refused to occupy Mariana's room, a beautiful room, the dream of any young lady, and I settled in the room with you, the one that belonged to Lucia and that apparently had served as a warehouse to store everything that my uncles could not or did not want to take home. The first day there, I was so tired that I slept in the room, still full of objects and memories of better times in the Mariano family. I tried to relax, forget about the nightmares, forget about what had happened years ago, a few meters from me. Thinking about that, I had slept for just a few seconds, when a sound alerted me suddenly. Someone was walking in the room with you. In Mariana's room I kept hearing the sound first very faint until it was strong enough to be sure that someone was walking in that room. I was immobile in shock without the courage to run to my parents' room because I had to cross the corridor and pass next to that door. I could not describe the fear I felt at that moment, and even more so when I heard the sound of a door opening. And then, a few heavy steps, walking slowly through the corridor until I reached my door. I wanted to think I was dreaming. I opened my eyes. Underneath the door, I saw the shadow of someone standing in front of her, in the corridor, and then the knob of my door turn, open. It was seconds or a fraction of a second, perhaps, that seemed like an eternity to me. When the door opened and I could recognize my father, I felt a mixture of relief and fear that to this day is difficult to explain. La tranquilidad volvió a mí, unos segundos, a mí que por un momento tuve fantasmas en la cabeza, pero así como llegó, se fue. Cuando mi papá prendió la luz, vi que estaba completamente pálido, y me preguntó con la voz más seria que la recuerdo, tú no eres la que estaba caminando hace un momento, ¿verdad? No, I answered, and so with everything in my 15 years I felt like my dad carried me at that moment and took me to the room with my mom who was waiting with the light on. I also heard it, I told them, while my mom, who has always been the most scientific vision of the family, tried to explain what we had all heard, saying that sometimes the energies remain in the places where such strong situations occurred, where there were such intense emotions. He said it and then he kept quiet. Maybe surprised by the theories that she always considered nonsense and that now she herself used to try to explain that what we had just heard were not the footsteps of a ghost. Then I knew that the next day my dad spoke to my Aunt Marta, who confirmed that the others had heard the footsteps in Mariana's room, that even the guys at the move made sure they heard the voice of a young woman singing on the upper floor, that she believed that Mariana was still in that house one way or another. He told her that it was too painful for her to live in that house where she lost everything, but that if he had sold the house at that price and precisely he era para que lo que permaneciera de mañana en el lugar lo hiciera al lado de alguien que lo hubiera querido mucho, no te lo puedo reprochar si no lo quieres hacer, le digo, no tengo como si yo misma no soporte estar allí, pero si puedes hermano no dejes sola allí a mi. When my dad told us, everything seemed to make sense in my aunt's fight. It seemed to be our duty, especially because her family always helped us a lot, and we all accepted without really knowing what we were getting into. The days of calm were few. Suddenly we heard steps that I walked in the empty room in the evenings. But we began to take it as something normal, to live with it, although I always washed my blood when I listened to it at night, already completely clear in the silence of those hours. With us everything was passable, but the situation in the house was not the same for our visits. Doña Andrea, for example, the lady who helped us 2 or 3 times a week with the cleaning, one day she stopped going. She stopped answering my mom's phone. Worried that something had happened to her, my mom went to look for her at her house, although she only located the street where she lived. Asking almost from house to house, she came to her, and the lady, very sad, he explained why she would not go. She would not go because of what inhabited the house. He told her that when she was alone and began to make the floors, there were steps that were always heard behind her, that they never left her alone. He said that on one occasion, without knowing, he opened the door to Mariana's room, which remained as it was, and he said that he had a feeling of infinite sadness, of desolation, and he had to close it immediately. The day he left to no longer return, he swore. She felt, clearly, 2 hands that tried to push her down the stairs. She fell, but managed to stop and didn't go any further, despite her age. At that moment, she, alone, talking in the house, told them to let her go, that she was going to leave, and that she wasn't going to come back. And she did. She asked my mom to excuse her and that she understood if she didn't believe her. And my mother then tried to calm her down by telling her what had happened to us, telling her the story of Mariana, of what had happened in that house. She tried to make her see that she did believe her. No, ma'am, she's wrong, she said. It's not any girl who's there in that house. Just at that moment, I left my room to receive a friend who was going to visit me. And we were about to realize that Doña Andrea was right. I was very happy when I heard the bell. Paula. Por fin había aceptado mi invitación a conocer la nueva casa. Estábamos los dos tristes porque por primera vez desde la primaria íbamos a estar en escuelas distintas y creo que de cierta forma ella estaba un poco molesta conmigo por ello, aunque le expliqué que no podía hacer nada sobre esa decisión. Cuando me asomé agitó la mano con gusto desde la entrada del jardín y yo bajé corriendo por ella. Mis papás no no estaban así que quería aprovechar para platicar con ella de todo lo que me estaba ocurriendo algo demasiado raro como para explicar por teléfono o por mensajes. La abrí y la comencé a mostrar el jardín de un diseño la verdad preciosísimo gracias a la paciencia, a la creatividad y dedicación de mi tía Marta. De repente le di la espalda para mostrar una fuente. Y escuché un grito de susto que casi inmediatamente se convirtió en una carcajada. ¿Qué pasó? Le pregunté. Tu papá casi me mata del susto, me respondió. Mi papá? ¿Por qué? ¿Qué te pasa? Se estaba asomando de la ventana de ala arriba con una máscara horrible de diablo, me dijo. When I heard him, I was filled with fear. I didn't know what to do and I hesitated to turn to the window. I didn't want to. I refused to think that it would be that room. Which window? I asked him. That one, the one in the middle. I felt my body flake. Se refería a la ventana de la habitación de Mariana que no es cierto. Le dije comenzando a llorar. Me preguntó que me pasaba, que por qué me ponía así. Yo solo pude decirle que no había nadie en la casa. I swear I saw it. He said to me, with a horrible face. I thought he was scaring us. You see how it is. The two of us looked out the window. I, at least, had a heavy feeling, as if someone was watching us. We could only see a fragment of the ceiling of the room from our perspective. The curtains were a little open, but we never touched them, we never opened them. Before we could say anything, a shadow passed through the ceiling, as if someone was walking through the room. I couldn't explain it, and the shadow was just a silhouette, but I felt it was. From Mariana's shadow. When we saw that silhouette pass, Paula approached me and hugged me scared. The curtains fell down like someone had torn them from below and we ran to the street hysterical. A neighbor was at the banquet and came near worried to ask us what was happening. I could not speak, but Paula told him that there was a stranger in the house. Call the police while I check. He said, and began to make signs to another neighbor who arrived in his car a few houses away. Someone got into his house, he shouted, and the neighbor took an L from his car, the one they used to change tires. They entered with Paula to the patio and she pointed to the window where we saw him. I could assure you that they stopped suddenly. Evidently knowing what room it was, and remembering that just above them, Mariana's inert body had remained hanging for hours, until her sister found it. They entered anyway, and Paula behind them. I did not call the police. Unfortunately, I knew. Or imagined what it was about. The minutes passed and they didn't leave. I entered to see what was happening and armed myself with courage. I climbed the stairs to meet Paula in front, calling the police at that moment. If there was anyone, he said. We managed to see that he ran and got into the closet. I couldn't believe it. I didn't know if I was going to be happy or scared, but I ran to the room where the two gentlemen were trying to open the doors to Mariana's huge closet. Get out, bastard, before the patrol arrives and you get worse. They said and yelled at him, and they pulled with all their strength, almost hanging from the doors, but they did not give up. The sound of the electric door at the entrance of the cars called our attention. One of the neighbors looked out the window and told me that my mom was coming. I left and the other neighbor came out from behind. But a few meters away, he stopped the reachiner from the closet door when it opened very slowly. We returned to the room. The neighbor who had stayed looked attentively towards the interior of the closet, squeezing his L. No one comes out, he said. The other neighbor said a lot of nonsense and began to remove the clothes violently. Desperately looking for someone who they assured to have seen. There was nothing, there was absolutely nothing, and the neighbor was getting paler as he checked over and over again and realized that it was not possible for someone to be there, that someone had entered. My mom ran up, alerted by Paula, and scared even more when she saw the faces of the three of us. She closed everything, put the curtains on, and asked us to go out to talk outside the room. Go down, girls. I'll be right there, she told us. We listened to her and she stayed talking to the two neighbors. After half an hour that seemed eternal, I heard their voices coming down the room. One of them kept saying something like he would pass him a phone number, insisting that he knew someone who could help us. The other one remained silent and with an absent look. My mother thanked them and accompanied them to the street. When she came back, she stayed in the garden, looking fixedly towards the window. When I noticed him, I left, and Paula did the same. The curtain of Mariana's room was slightly open, just 5 centimeters. "Did you see that I had closed it all, right?" asked my mom. "Yes, we saw it," answered Paula. Meanwhile, I was paralyzed. In the small gutter I could see a white face, not pale, but completely white. And with some eyes of a totally black color, watching us. I don't know if they could also see it, but if they did, they didn't say anything. I cut my eyes and turned to the other side. I looked back, and the face remained there, completely clear, despite seeing it through a grudge. And did not move. On the contrary, it seemed to remain there so that we could notice it. "Let's go inside," my mom said, surprising us. She said it in an angry tone, as if she were very upset. There was no fear in her voice. When we entered, she began to talk to us, but raising her voice as if she wanted someone else to listen to her. "Esta casa es nuestra que bastante nos costó y vamos a vivir aquí sin importar nada y si a alguien le molesta se me va largando pero nadie nos va a mover en sus palabras tan molestas había algo de tranquilidad para mí mi mamá estaba reconociendo lo que fuera que estuviera pasando y estaba tomando acción determinada a defender lo que era suyo cuando llegó mi papá un rato después platicaron en privado nos juntamos a la hora de la cena y lo hacimos relativamente tranquilos. When Paula's parents passed by her and I went to leave her at the door, I returned to see that the heavy silence that accompanied us had broken, and my parents were arguing, apparently, about how they had to handle the situation. Even with everything, my mom tried to be rational as it can be when arguing about a supposed ghost that lives in your house. My dad went to a drawer next to the entrance, angry, and took out a box of cigarettes that he must have had years before, because it was a long time since I saw him smoke. He left and my mom did it behind him. I heard them from the door. "We can go now," my dad said. "Put an announcement that it is renting into hell, if it is renting well, and if not, we'll see." "Don't be absurd, please, Ernesto," my mom answered. "Why are we going to leave? What are we going to be afraid of? When have you known that a ghost hurts someone?" When he said that, she remained quiet. My dad also said that. I think at that moment they realized that they were standing right below where they had found hanging. Mariana could not be ignored, nor what was happening, nor that face in the window. The strong steps that were heard at night are the steps that I always thought were of Mariana and that were heard only in the day, those always without leaving their room. I hoped I could finally enter school so I wouldn't have to spend so much time in that house, to distract myself, to meet new people, to focus on the task for the first time in my life. My mom had started making friends with the neighbor in front. Surgió iba en el mismo colegio al que yo entraría y los dos creyeron que era una buena idea que me hablara un poco de la escuela antes de entrar, además así al menos tendría una cara conocida en mis primeros días. Resultó ser todo lo contrario y no tenía nada que ver con Luis Alberto el vecino, sino con todo lo que desencadenó la plática que tuvimos, con todo lo que aprenderíamos el uno del otro. Mariana iba en mi salón desde la primaria. Si sabías, ¿no? Fue lo primero que me dijo cuando nos conocimos. Why no? No lo sabía. Luis Alberto was a great person, but with a somewhat strange mood, so he had almost no friends except a small group of boys just as strange as he was with those who gathered at school. Mariana, well, let's say she was the opposite extreme. She was a girl who liked everyone well and everyone at school knew her. That's why, despite greeting each other and sometimes sharing the way to school with one father or another, there was never a true friendship with Luis. However, he seemed to know perfectly the story around suicide. He had been in contact with Mariana his last few weeks. And I was about to find out more things that I was comfortable with for mental health. Have you ever felt anything strange in that house? I asked. I question you without the desire to scare you, but I'm going to tell you something. The window of my little brother goes to the front of your house, and sometimes at night, he comes to my room asking me to let him sleep with me. He says there's a girl hanging in the house in front of me. My mom scolds him for saying that, and she blames me. He says that I probably told him what happened, but I've never told him anything. And that seems very strange to me, especially because of all the strange things that Mariana lived through in the end. When he finished telling me that, I felt like a bucket of cold water. And it's just that my mom had been very careful not to tell anything about the weird things that happened in the house. That even the neighbors who helped us that time told us that the whole robbery was about a thief trying to get in through the back door. What Luis Alberto was telling me had nothing to do with what had happened to us. He was telling the truth because it had happened. When I entered the school, I realized how difficult it would be. Mariana was a very popular girl and everyone had found out what had happened. And somehow everyone knew about me, that I was her cousin and that I now lived in her house. I would swear they were even afraid of me. It seemed that no one wanted to talk to me, and Luis Alberto at that time went out to rescue. In his spare time, he invited me to live with him and his group of friends. All of them obsessed with card games, comics, gore movies, and music that I didn't know until then. We already knew something was going to happen to your cousin, said Tony. A boy of almost 190, chubby, with a childish face despite his incipient beard, too much for his 17 years, and who apparently was the leader of the group. She approached us to ask us about certain things she had discovered, she continued. What kind of things? I asked her. Things? Videos. You'll get to know her. Your cousin had very strange tastes among the things I was looking for on the internet. And I'm not talking about the deep web or anything like that. I'm talking about pages within reach of everyone. Of videos on YouTube without any kind of privacy, more than having dozens of random numbers and letters in the title. I don't know how it got to them, I don't know how it started to fall into that, but they put it very badly. Luis Alberto remained silent while the others talked about how people could suggest themselves when they came across strange videos on the network. I noticed it, and when we walked alone towards the house, I asked him why. I don't think it was just suggestion, he said. Nobody commits suicide for suggestion. Your cousin didn't need anything. They say at school that it was because she discovered that one of her friends was going to go out with her ex-boyfriend, and the whole group knew it, except her. But I don't think it was something that would have affected her like that. She also took a break, as if she had regretted something she was about to say, and suddenly she said goodbye, halfway through the way, and started walking back towards the school. Everything seemed to me more and more strange, and when I got home, I heard someone dragging a piece of furniture or something like that on the top floor. I yelled at my mom to see if it was her, but no one answered. I took the phone and confirmed that my parents were not at home when this sound struck the corridor next to the stairs. I decided to go out to the yard and start doing the garden work. I could not stand hearing these strange things, but it gave me a huge terror to see something suddenly in the house. My mom came with a girl, the new girl to help us in maintenance, and when I greeted her, I saw that Luis Alberto was coming to his house with one of the boys in the group. They made signs for me to get closer and I went with them. Look, we're going to explain some things to you, but you can't tell the others, nor the group's boys, nor anyone at school, nor your parents. Okay? I told them I was a little nervous. Let's go to your house. I think it's easier to explain it there. We enter. And I told my mom that I would be with some friends in my room. We went up. Luis stopped at the entrance and pointed to the door next to you. That one over there is the door to Mariana's room, right? Yes, I answered. Come on, I think we have to be there. I'm sure he didn't do it for the boyfriend or the friends, said the other boy. I think it was because Mariana was moving away from her group. She didn't care about spending time with them anymore. She almost always spent time connected to those bizarre chats she found or talking to us. Is this the window? She asked as she stood next to her and opened the curtains suddenly. I thought she was talking to me, and before I could answer, Luis Alberto answered that yes. He also approached the window and pointed to the house in front. The trees barely let that particular window see, from where he saw, the window of his brother's room. I haven't told you everything, forgive me please, but I promise you that now I will be 100% honest with you, said Luis. Weeks before what happened, I started to worry a lot about Mariana. The things I said were getting more and more strange. She would send me strange messages in the morning, and in the morning she would assure me that it was not her. Suddenly she would send messages even to the chat of our group, to which we ended up integrating. And could write, for example, good night, and then a lot of characters without meaning, and then continue as if nothing had happened. On one occasion, a photo was sent to us, out of nowhere, a photo of herself with a completely serious expression, looking at the news. Behind her was a huge black silhouette. Se veía movida como si alguien hubiera corrido rápidamente para no salir en la foto. Cuando la mando yo fui al cuarto de mi hermano para ver hacia acá, hacia este cuarto, para ver si había alguien aquí con ella. Y vi una figura junto a la ventana. Al principio parecía ser Mariana sobre una silla porque se veía más alta que el marco, como si estuviera arreglando algo. But she did not move, she was only still here in front of this window right where you are standing now. Suddenly Mariana, with her hair unmistakable, entered the room, and I realized that what was next to the window was not a person, it was nothing normal but a silhouette of something huge. I ran to my room to write to Mariana in the chat. I took my laptop and ran back to my brother's room to see. I know you're not going to believe me, but that huge silhouette looked like he was crouching. And a face of a smiling devil looked at me through the window. It looked like a horrible mask. When I heard Luis's story, I left the room immediately. What he had just described was too similar to what Paula had assured to see in that window just a few days before. I asked them if we could continue talking later. They said goodbye and left for Luis's house. I stayed in the kitchen with my mother and Hortensia, the new girl. They heard some footsteps running on the rift floor, and Hortensia paled. It's what I told you, but I tell you that you have nothing to worry about, my mom said, trying to calm him down. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Luis Alberto with an image pixelated by the cutout, but that left no doubt of what it was. The message only said, "We are here in front of my brother's room. There is someone right now, in Mariana's window." I asked Luis Alberto and his friend to come. And together with Hortensia and my mom we went upstairs to check the room. When we entered we only found a horrible smell that filled the room. We followed the origin to the bathroom of that room that no one used. The smell came from the sink. It was an disgusting, nauseating smell, as if there was a dead animal. Luis said he would check, but Hortensia interrupted him and it was necessary to clean it. Luis stayed by her side while the others waited outside the room. Shortly after Hortensia screamed, Luis began to vomit. We entered quickly, alarmed to see that she had taken her hair out of the sink, a big ball of blonde hair tangled with what seemed to be coagulated blood. It smelled horrible and we could not stand the desire to vomit too. I had the photograph of that devil in the window for a long time. I still have it in my old computer, and once I even saw her in a paranormal theme forum, although I have no idea who uploaded it, and there they assured that it had been taken in another city. Hortensia lasted only a week with us. Then her sister began to come, and she did stay for a long time. She told us that Hortensia, as a result of being with us, had become very sensitive to bad things, to paranormal things. She felt very strongly the presence of a girl in the house and attributed it to Mariana. She assured that she could see her reflected behind her when cleaning, near a mirror or showcase. She found blonde hairballs in the washrooms of the entire house. She endured for a few days, until someone or something pulled her very hard from her hair. When that happened, my mom was in the kitchen. And no matter how much she tried, she could no longer convince her to stay with us. We couldn't blame her. Doña Andrea had already gone to feel the presence of something. Hortensia, to feel Mariana. It seemed to us something strange that one had not spoken of the other presences. Each one felt something in particular. The strange thing was that of Hortensia, of whom we continued to know about her sister. And then she even saw strange things in her house. I always felt bad about it. My mom still wants to think that it's just her suggestion. For those days, Elia, one of Mariana's friends, began to talk to me. Apparently, he had befriended the other girls in the group and thought that the best way to make them angry was to get together with me, whom the others, I suppose, saw as undesirable. He confessed that to me later, when we started to get along better and ended up being very good friends. Through her, I could understand a little more about Mariana's last few weeks. She moved away, slowly. She stopped hanging out with them every weekend like they had done until then. The others knew that something was wrong with her, but they decided to ignore it. When I told him what Luis Alberto and his friends had told me, he made fun of me a bit. Did Tony tell you that he doesn't know how Mariana started seeing weird things on the internet? That damn fatso. It was the cause of everything. I felt weird, deceived. I asked Elia to accompany me home to confront Luis Alberto about it. When we arrived, I called him and told him to come over to my house, which was important. He arrived minutes later, and when he asked, he denied everything, saying that Elia had surely lied to me and that Tony had nothing to do with it. Elia left the bathroom where she was hiding and Luis became pale. Okay, I haven't told you the whole truth, but I wouldn't like you to get involved in this anymore, he said. Elio responded with a sarcastic smile. I guess it's a little late for that. I don't know if you've noticed where he lives and the things he has to endure every night. Apparently everyone knew that strange side of Tony. Not just the guys in his little group, but the rest of the class. Other boys from school, so I later found out, even some teachers. And, however, no one knew for sure what this whole matter was about, nor had they seen the videos. It was a kind of club that very few could enter, and somehow, we don't know for sure, Mariana entered him. With more confidence, he told me something very strange. Since the suicide, they had been receiving messages from Mariana's Facebook account. Very strange messages. Photos of Mariana with each of them, but in which Mariana's face appeared distorted, with almost demonic factions. They talked about it with everyone, and that kept them even more emotionally affected. When one of them began to respond to the messages, demanding that they stop joking about it and that they respect Mariana, whoever was on the other side of the message began to write things that only Mariana knew, secrets that only she knew. This is what happened to the others until they decided to block her. I remember that I didn't like to see her profile at all. When they told me about the messages, I entered. I saw their photos. I saw those of which we went out together. I was about to write in the chat to see if there was any kind of response. In the end, I ended up only reporting Mariana's account, and eventually it was given down by Facebook as an active user. Luis Alberto was sure that Tony was the one who had sent those messages, but we could never confirm it. The day the Facebook account was cancelled, I heard a relax in Mariana's room. Steps and things moving. The bathroom's water doors opened, and we had to go in to close them. As we approached, the steps stopped, and at night it got worse. When I was trying to sleep, I suddenly heard some different steps, the heavy steps of the corridor. I was surprised that my parents didn't wake up on this occasion. Siempre que las cosas se ponían demasiado intensas, mi papá iba por mí y me lavaba al cuarto con ellos. Esa noche en particular, no escucharon nada. I tried to ignore the noises, the footsteps, to put music on my headphones as always. But all of a sudden, a blow overshadowed me. Something strong in the room with you. I felt the vibration on the floor. I took off my headphones and listened carefully. In that silence, only with the sound of dogs barking at a distance, I could clearly hear Mariana's voice crying, briefly, in the room with you. Then, a few steps running and losing myself in the direction of the window, as if someone had thrown themselves. I was shocked. I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't understand what I had just heard. I heard something in the garden, near the trash cans. I looked up, and there, standing in the dark, I could clearly see Tony, looking at Mariana's window, without muting in front of me or without realizing that I saw him. I remember that for a moment I felt that everything was clear. That in some way Tony was responsible for everything, that he could have been in the room moments before and had jumped. Of course, these are conclusions that he drew in fractions of a second while he was shooting from the room to the garden to confront Tony. I could see him escape at full speed when he was leaving the patio, jumping the small fence. Suddenly something held my back, and it was not Tony or his flight. Just beside me, barely looking back, I could see the silhouette of Mariana's feet hanging. I stopped. I felt ants on my legs, my back, my arms. I knew I had to run in, escape, but my legs didn't respond. I was just making an inhuman effort not to turn. I was frozen. So, I looked back. I saw how the hanging feet were approaching me. I took strength from the fear and ran in. I can almost swear that in 3 seconds I crossed the house, I climbed the stairs, and I began to knock on my parents' room. For some reason, this time, the security of their room was on, without turning to see. I clearly felt that the hanging figure was walking down the hall to my back to get closer to me. When my mom opened the door, I ran in and threw myself into my dad's arms, asking them to close the door, because there was something in the corridor. They couldn't see anything. When they looked out the window, my dad only said that there were people in the house in front, that of Luis Alberto. Something very strange, because they slept very early and past 3 o'clock. I sent him a message and he only answered that we would talk in the morning. "Is everything okay?" I asked. He only answered with a round no. The light steps to the side. They heard each other again that night. Later I learned that Tony woke Luis Alberto up, calling him and asking him to leave when he was just escaping from my house. He told him it was an emergency. When he left, he gave him a list that seemed to have just written with a hasty letter. They were links. Links written by hand. And apparently by memory. Links. Videos of YouTube. You will understand, you will understand. He did not stop repeating it, and he ran away as soon as he gave them to him. The angle and the trees did not let him see clearly towards my house, but Luis affirms that when he turned, he could see in the distance between branches and leaves Mariana hanging in the same place where she had taken her life. I didn't tell him what I had seen right then and there, but I certainly believed him. I didn't want to watch the videos. I tried, but I couldn't. He decided to show them to the next day to a very close friend of his group. Tony didn't go back to school. The links were checked by school staff but not by the police. Apparently, they weren't interested in reopening a case to see if Mariana's suicide had been induced by someone else. I knew they went to look for Tony at his house, but he only lived with his older brother, and he assured them that he didn't know where he had gone. El hermanito de Luis Alberto se quitó la vida un mes después no quise saber cómo lo hizo, solo supe que Luis lo encontró y ya no volvía a hablar con él nunca. Volvió a su casa y sus padres se fueron solo días después de lo que pasó. I know. He deleted his Facebook account or blocked me, and he didn't communicate with his friends again. At home, the activity calmed down a bit, to the point that we no longer had to think about leaving. Nobody has felt any physical aggression. The heavy steps have almost stopped being heard. As you know, the first part of the story was more about what was happening to me at that time. I never expected it to happen to Luis Alberto's brother. One day, I hope to see him and know more about it. Know what happened to everyone. It's the only thing that would leave me more calm. The Halloween passed, a boy I was hanging out with came by and, without knowing anything about what had happened here, mentioned to me that he had seen a figure hanging in the yard. Obviously, we didn't even decorate for those dates. I was calmer, until one day when I got home, I saw him. It was